So, architecting for sustainability, where we can reduce cost and innovate with speed. I'm joined by Tom and Paul, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to one, tell us what they do here at AWS, but also what is their effort with sustainability when it comes to AWS services, and how our customers, our builders, can be sustainable when they're looking to build workloads within AWS. Tom, Paul, thanks for joining us.
Hey,
Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
good to see you. I'm Paul Moran. I'm a technical account manager. I work in the support side of things, and my involvement in sustainability has fallen out of a lot of that support engagement, and it's about the longer term life cycle of customers' deployments in AWS, and that's really where my interest lies.
Yeah, I'm also a technical account manager. I work within our sustainability technical field community, where I help customers optimize workloads and also help AWS form their roadmap on sustainability as well with those customers.
So, when we're using the word sustainability, to me, that can mean a lot of different definitions. What is sustainability when it comes to your world, Tom and Paul?
So typically in Amazon, we use a language that's been defined by UN over the years, and they have 17 sustainability development goals, and they cover a wide range of areas that affect policy across the globe. And I think there's about 196 signatories for it. But the focus that we tend to find our customers leading us towards these days is it's all about sustainable production of services, energy consumption, and how we can control our carbon emissions.
Yeah, a lot of customers that I work with are interested in the way that AWS themselves are contributing to our side of the responsibility model, as we call it, where we're innovating on the customer's behalf to power our data centers with renewable energy, for example, and invest in making buildings that are effective with water, for example. But we also need to help our customers architect within the cloud. And that's kind of going to be a majority of the conversation today.
Awesome. And so, for those that are not familiar with the shared responsibility model, it is a model that shows what AWS is responsible for, and then what you, the customer, are responsible for. And it sounds like today, AWS does its part to be sustainable when it comes to our data centers and our presence. But we're also going to be talking about how our customers can practice sustainability when they move to AWS too. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We use the shared responsibility term a few times. Like, a lot of our customers are used to using it with security, where we secure the cloud itself, and the customer secures the assets within the cloud. And it's exactly the same with sustainability, where we need to give our customers the tools to be sustainable in the cloud, and then help them be sustainable in the cloud.
Now, from what I understand, there's been customers that ask for guidance on how to be sustainable when they're moving their workloads from an on-prem environment to AWS. What are some sort of tools or things that customers can leverage to kind of start planning that journey, but with sustainability at the front of mind?
Yeah, I think a big part of customers' realization over time is that your architecture equals your bill at the end of the day when you come to the cloud. It's no longer that kind of that OPEX, CAPEX conundrum. It's very much an OPEX thing. And if you design it really well, your bill starts to come down. And that's very much the same for your footprint. That your architecture equals the amount of energy that you're kind of drawing down, the amount of carbon that's being expended in terms of building that broader estate. So we look at a number of different scenarios, but the typical pattern that we see is lift and shift out of data center, where we get immediate savings because of the efficiencies that we drive. But then on top of that, we look at ways of driving deeper and deeper optimizations. And there's a real focus on, well, from a TAM's perspective, there's the low-hanging fruit of driving that optimization, making sure that you're right-sizing your infrastructure, making sure that you're moving your technologies in the right kind of direction. But I think a big part of that is also cultural, because you're having to pivot the organization. And whilst you're doing those kind of big changes, capturing the sustainability outcomes as a part of that's a really good time to do it, because otherwise you're bolting it on at the end.
Now, you mentioned this term right-sizing. And just by definition, real quick, what is right sizing when it comes to like compute?
So Typically, whenever I look at customers at estate, they'll have a large EC2 estate of instances, and there'll be varying consumption patterns across the piece. Some will have big memory footprints, low CPU utilization, and vice versa. Right sizing is about making sure that we are getting the right resources for the job at that point in time, and a really big part of that is having that flexible mindset, not just sitting there and saying, well, I've standardized on an M5 2x large and it's always going to be an M5 2x large. It's having the flexibility to say, let's look at the appropriate kind of technology for my needs.
And so in what we'll say Kyle terms, is using the proper amount of compute to match the actual workload instead of over provisioning your hardware.
Yeah.
I mean, raise your hand if you've ever over provisioned hardware for an app.
Well, what I do to avoid it these days is to work with managed services, to mean that I don't have to think quite so much about that. I could use Lambda, for example, for compute, and think about scaling in smaller chunks, be it serverless or be it containers. So that's another option you have.
So one of the things that I always hear is, you always want to track improvement. You could say, okay, well, we're moving from our on-prem environment. We have lots of hardware that we're running, and we're moving to AWS. Where can we see that our efforts for sustainability have improved, or that we're going towards the right direction for being more sustainable and cost effective?
There's two ways we'd attempt to answer that question, which is if you wish to compare with the renewable energy use of your on-prem data center with your AWS use. We released the customer carbon footprint tool about a year and a half ago. That gives customers the ability to see how much CO2 they're consuming within their AWS estate, breaks it down by EC2, S3, and other, and gives you a view of your actual CO2 use in metric ton equivalent, CO2 metric ton equivalent over time. When customers want to optimize their workloads, we have other methods of doing that, using something called proxy metrics.
Can you tell me more?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought you might ask.
It sounds very important, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear about proxy metrics.
Yeah. A proxy metric is when we need to react. Let's say that we're doing a release, and we need to know whether that release has affected our sustainability KPIs in a positive or a negative way. We need to see really quickly. So we need to get that information from various sources. We can get information to see if a change has had a negative or a positive effect. And we do that based on a hypothesis. So, for example, I have a hypothesis which I'm pretty sure is right, that if I turn my instances off at night and use less CPU over time, then I'll use less CO2. So if I can map that over time, and I can see that my release, and you can probably tell I'm talking about a release here as configuration as code as well as code, because we need to help our customers be efficient in very many ways. There are multiple tenets which are aligned with the well-architected framework pillar for sustainability, and there's just two of the things within that.
So you mentioned a couple things, and when it comes to a release, so it's basically being able to forecast that. Am I getting that? Am I understanding that correctly? So you're able to forecast the impact, or are you just able to say, look at the impact and then quickly scale back if you need to?
Forecasting is a very interesting point, but primarily we're talking about seeing the effect of changes really quickly from the very recent past.
Okay.
But we do have technologies that could help forecast as well, be it QuickSight forecasting or multiple other technologies.
And so you mentioned also a hypothesis, and I didn't realize we were going to be using the scientific method almost 15 years out of high school, but this is great. And so when we're looking at when we're hypothesizing what our impact is going to be, are there ways that we can adjust what kind of hardware we're using that might have a lower carbon footprint? Am I getting that carbon footprint?
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. We need to, let's say that we need to, the hypothesis is we want to bring down the amount of CPU hours we're using over time. So we want to be able to see that happening very, very quickly. To do that, we need to get those metrics, and we need to visualize them.
And what are some different ways that those visualizations can be presented? Is that through like CloudWatch metrics, or is that through the carbon footprint calculator? Did I get that right?
Yeah, so on the proxy metrics side, we get those from a number of sources. It's not the carbon footprint tool in this case. Proxy metrics can be gained from resource use. So resource use can be seen in CloudWatch. It can also be seen in the cost and usage report. Many customers use the cost and usage report for mapping cost, but the usage side of it is tremendously important as well. Once we have those metrics and the hypothesis, then we can map we need to choose which of our assumptions are give us the most value, the most bang for buck, and then we need to implement them and see them. And then we come to the visualization piece, which I think is what you were driving at. So you can use technologies like CloudWatch dashboards.
Okay.
I tend to use QuickSight. It's one of my favorite tools now. But some customers use things like Elasticsearch and things like this.
Okay, so there is data that can be used to create these visualizations for the use case that our customers have for tracking their sustainability.
Yeah, my favorite in that scenario is showing the CFO the reduction in their bill at the end of the month. So you can, nothing drives C-level engagement like seeing the dollar signs get driven down in terms of those numbers. And it's simple things. The business hours represent about 25% of the week. If you turn off stuff outside of that, that's a 75% saving, and those things get seen straight away. If you only can do that at the weekend, I know it doesn't feel like it, but actually the weekend is 35% of the whole week. That's an instant.
Why does it only feel like 2% of my whole week, though?
Absolutely. And being able to demonstrate those things really, really quickly has a big impact. And it also, from a support perspective, from the operational excellence side of things, it breeds really good practices from folk coming from a data center into the cloud, because they're gaining the confidence of knowing what to do when they turn something off and bring it back to life again. And those practices in non-production environments, they work their way in through to production environments as well. So there's a whole lot of cultural and organizational benefits that come from those kind of practices too.
So you mentioned driving down cost too, and we mentioned right sizing. What are other ways that I'm probably the worst to talk to when it comes to saving money, but when it comes to, aside from right sizing, what are other options to help reduce the costs of running and operating a workload within AWS? Yeah,
so EC2's probably the best example, because we have the widest range of options in terms of that in those regards. And with EC2, default for steady state workloads will be things like EC2 savings plans, and those are the ones that offer the deepest discounts, and you know that they're going to be around for the longest, and they are more aligned against individual instance types of families.
Okay.
But then you've also got compute savings plans, which is a bit more general. What that gives you the scope to do is to say, well, I'm starting with this particular instance type, but I've done my right sizing exercise and I've changed to this instance type, but I'm still getting the discounts that benefit that. So you can continue to evolve your estate as new instance types come along, or as your applications change over time. Then on top of that, I always look at things like Spot. Spot is a fantastic kind of access to compute, because what it gives you is massively deep discounts, but it also extends the life cycle of the servers that we're operating. And from a carbon perspective, that embodied carbon means that it goes from maybe a 3 or 5 year life cycle to a 7, 8, 9 year life cycle. So we're getting much more value out of the carbon that we've embodied in there. And once again, going back to the TAM agenda in this, in terms of the operational excellence, if you're designing with a stateless workload, you're designing with failure in mind, and you're designing with a workload that can stay up and running in all of those kind of circumstances.
Okay. And for, those different types of ways to adjust how you're going to be spending compute, or your costs associated with compute, we'll include the links in the chat that's scrolling on the right-hand side here. And so you can follow that to learn more about spot instances, savings plans, reserved instances.
Yeah.
So we'll have those resources that you can look at. So never fear, we will provide you that information in our chat window right here, somewhere, probably right there. So you mentioned EC2. And when I think of like a customer journey that is, moving to AWS, lift and shift is very popular. But as they start to modernize or refactor their applications, they might be taking advantage of things like managed services, where AWS is managing most of the underlying infrastructure. And to provide an example for folks, like EKS on Fargate or ECS on Fargate, that is a managed service by AWS for you to use containers. How does reduction in costs and sustainability apply to these managed services?
It's a good question, because your previous question talks about what levers can I pull to be more sustainable. And another thing you can do is use managed services, because they're highly optimized for utilization. They scale in smaller bits. You're scaling in kind of sand as opposed to big stones. It also allows you to take advantage of the investments that AWS has made on your behalf. And we're innovating and using our recent technologies such as Graviton processors, which are more efficient. Now, if you have to manage your own EC2 instance on Graviton, then you've got to do a little bit of work. You've got to use one of our AMIs that is compiled for Graviton, and you've got to recompile your app. But if you're using a managed service like RDS or any of our other services that use those, of which there are many, then you're using more efficient hardware. It's about choosing the right tool for the job, while also taking advantage of the work that AWS is doing on your behalf in the background.
And when, sometimes I think we kind of take it for granted when we talk about like a managed service and AWS, all the things in the background that are going on for AWS to provide the services to our builders. Just thinking about the data centers that we have and the air conditioning, the ways that we're looking to reduce, carbon emissions, those ways. Are there any things that you have that you'd like to mention about how AWS, looks to contribute to sustainability?
So one of the key things that we do from that whole infrastructure piece is, so we talk about how we are the world's largest global purchaser of renewable energy, and that's true, but it's only a part of the story. We don't just purchase the energy; we invest in infrastructure to build that energy as well. So we make sure that the grids that we operate in, we are always going to be contributing energy in those environments, and it's always renewable, and it's targeted at reducing the carbon intensity of those grids. So we're in our own way, we're reducing the amount of carbon that's going out into the grid. I live in Scotland. It's very, very windy here. We've got a 0.5 gigawatt wind farm just down the road from me. It's a great way of contributing back to the regions that we operate in. And that's just the beginning. That's before it even gets into the data center. We're also in a situation where once we're in the data center, we look at really closely at how we plan out the data center, how we do the air conditioning, how we move the water around, how we align the racks to make sure that the air can flow in the best way possible. And actually, Graviton's a really good part of that story. Graviton's amazing because, yes, ARM has that rich heritage in low energy utilization, and everybody has an ARM chip in their pocket. But the flip side to that is that there's a thermal advantage as well. And what that means is that we can reduce the amount of energy that's going into just cooling the data center as well. So there's a lot of systems thinking that goes into how we plan the services that we deploy from a renewable perspective and a sustainable perspective.
That is incredible. And Graviton is the chipset that AWS built. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So we're currently on the third generation of Graviton, and it's moving into the high performance compute area as well. So it's much broadening it, marketing quite a bit. So
that's awesome. I never thought I would hear high performance and low carbon emissions ever used in the same sentence, but it sounds like that's the direction it's going, which is great. Now, we talked a lot about how, AWS is doing what we can to be more sustainable. And we talked about how customers can reduce the cost by using spot instances, RIs, reserved instances, and right sizing and having right sizing exercises. How do we change when we're doing these exercises, how do we make sure that the culture also sustains, no pun intended, to having that at the forefront to when we are building new workloads, we develop that culture within an organization alongside the other pillars of well architected like reliability and security.
Well, do you want to go, Paul?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting way of viewing it, because it's one of these things that is mutually beneficial across all of those approaches. So we think of well architected as the pillars. We've got the little diagram of it and being the pillars beneath a roof, but sustainability fits across each of those different pillars as well. And it has something to contribute to each aspect of it. The high utilization, the containerization piece, that's a really good example of how it leans into the reliability side of things. Containerization means that you've got your stateless workload. It means that you're ready and available for failure, and you've got some good practices in place to do that. And using technologies like Spot leans into that lower cost side of things. But because it's containers, instead of using 5% or 10% of a CPU of an instance type, you're able to max that out at that 80% level. You're getting much more bang for your buck, and the utilization levels are much, much higher as a result. So there's a bit of a cultural mindset that has to change, but you need KPIs from your leadership team to say this is what we're striving for from an organizational perspective. You need your developers and your architects to be looking at factoring in those sustainability objectives as a part of those non-functional requirements at the very beginning, along with resiliency and security. But then you also have to embed that into your broader kind of DevOps culture of folk, and say that this is another aspect of being responsible manufacturers of code.
Awesome. And so if a customer or builders are saying, okay, where do I even start? Where can they go for help to start these types of exercises in a sustainability journey?
We have a number of well-architected labs that can help customers get this visibility, so that they can make their architectures what we call impact aware. You're aware of the impacts of your architecture, and because of that, you can make changes to that architecture and do it fast and iterate and really start working to implement to embed this within your culture. Yeah, I'd start there. We also have a number of dashboards which are available for doing that. Look at our cloud intelligence dashboards framework, and you can see there's a whole load of graphs there that can show your utilization in various ways.
Awesome. And is there a way they can pick up the phone and say, Paul, Tom, I need more help in the lab?
We're always here. Yeah, reach out to us directly. Our contact details are here. And also just reach out to your AWS account teams should you have them. We're always happy to perform well-architected reviews that are specifically orientated towards sustainability, or even just talking about sustainability, talking about our journey and how we can be on this journey together. There are many aspects to sustainability. We're very passionate about it, and we know that our customers are too.
Awesome. Paul, Tom, it was a pleasure to talk to you more about sustainability and how we can be more impact aware of our workloads. Because really, let's be honest, we have one Earth, and that's the only one we get. So whatever we can do to reduce the impact while being able to innovate and create awesome things to better the future is all right in my book. But yeah, so Paul, Tom, again, thank you so much. Everyone have a wonderful day. Be kind to the earth, and we'll catch you on the next one.
No, thank you for your time. Have a great Earth Day. Take care.